Okie dokie. So as I was told, there's the majority of people here in the room are first-time visitors to a KNIME Summit. So let me give you a quick introduction or summary of what this session is about. This is split in two sessions. The first part is about showing you, presenting and demoing some of the enhancements that we did to the KNIME software in the last year or so. And it's not just changes to the software, but also other changes that you might find interesting. It's not only done by me, even though my name is on the agenda, but by the team. So we'll have different people here on the stage that show some of the new features or the changes. If you have any questions on how to use the software, just wanted to have a demo, we have 2 demo stations outside. Just go there. There will always be one of the KNIMers. We have these yellow badges, as Michael said, to answer those questions. Also ask them questions that really are burning. We have all things set up. The first thing I'd like to reinforce is the idea of the KNIME as an open platform, especially of an open source platform. There's a new puzzle now also on our webpage that highlights the idea how the KNIME software ecosystem looks like. Michael mentioned that already, that we now really have 2 different products. The top part is what most people just refer to as KNIME. It's the KNIME Analytics platform with different extensions. The part on the left, the yellow part, there are extensions that are maintained by this company. And then there are also partner extension and the community extension, even though the green box should be slightly larger, but it didn't quite fit into the picture. And at the bottom, we have the KNIME Server that is helping you to automate, deploy, collaborate using KNIME. All of this will be discussed in the session. And previously, and more than a year ago, this puzzle looked slightly more complicated because there used to be extensions of the KNIME Analytics platform that weren't open source, but they are now. Specifically, we used to have the personal productivity extensions we open sourced middle of last year in July, and it's a set of functionality. It's not new nodes, it's just a bunch of functionality that help you to be more efficient in designing KNIME workflows, reusing components, etc. I'd like to highlight some of those because people often do not know about these. The first one is what we call the workflow diff. The use case is very obvious. You have different workflows, or you have one workflow, you make changes, you make a backup, you learn that you are not smart enough to remember what you've changed. So the workflow diff allows you to compare 2 of those workflows and then show you the summary of what has changed, like nodes that were removed, added, nodes that they have in common, but where the configuration is different. So it will show you that in that diff view. And that then also works on the KNIME server, where you have different versions or revisions or snapshots or whatever you want to call them of your workflow, and it allows you to see what you changed between these different versions. Again, if you wanted to have a demo, go outside, ask the people at the demo stations. The other piece, which is quite handy, and Michael mentioned that already in his talk, is the ability to design these metanodes, he called that interaction points, but these metanodes, so each of those gray boxes really encapsulates, let's say, a little method or operation, so it's a bunch of nodes. And metanode sharing describes the ability to take this metanode and put this, by using the context menu, putting this back into your KNIME Explorer so that later on you can reuse these components in either the same workflow or a different workflow. And then once you make changes to that template in your repository, then all the workflows also update automatically. So it's like programming something and having a central masterpiece of it. And obviously, if you want to be collaborating with your team, then you would be using the KNIME server to share those metanodes with your team. The third piece that I wanted to mention is the ability to call out to different workflows that you have in your, let's say, in your local workspace. There's a node that's called call local workflow. There's also a node called call remote workflow that allows you to call workflows that live on the KNIME server. This piece is quite powerful because you can build up your project by means of having different workflows and orchestrate them using those nodes. This piece is also the centerpiece to the talk that Greg and Daria and Anna are going to give right after the lunch break. It's the Monster Model Factory, where you see that KNIME node used in anger, really. The other piece that used to be not open source but now is are the big data extensions. And the big data extensions, we open sourced them in December. It's really two different components. There are the connectors that allow you to connect to big data storages like Hive and HDFS, so just read out the data right to those storage systems. And the other piece is our executor for Apache Spark. That's just really a number of nodes, more than 50, close to 100 different nodes that allow you to run your computation in Spark. We are going to talk about that a bit more in a bit. Okay. The other change that we made is that we now are hosting our entire source code on GitHub and mirror that also on Bitbucket. So you are able to also check out source code if you are kind of the programmer and want to see what has changed. So this is now really open source also by, let's say, by the GitHub definition. One of the implications that comes with it is that we also made nightly builds available. So at KNIME, we have 2 feature releases a year, one in summer, one in December. In between, we may have patch releases, but really the new features come out in let's say, in July and December. If you wanted to have a peek of what is changing between as part of one of those release cycles, you could go onto the KNIME webpage and download one of the nightly builds. There's also a changelog. If you go onto that webpage, you will also be pointed to that little disclaimer telling you that this is coming out freshly from the build system, so it's not as thoroughly tested as a released version. Yeah. Okay, coming back to our little software puzzle, what we are trying to do in the following is to split this a bit between the open source pieces, so the top part, or specifically the yellow parts, and then also later talking about the KNIME Server and how you can combine of those two. Especially, we'd like to go over these different points. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the integrations that we added in the last year and some utility nodes and deep learning, big data, education, evangelism, and then KNIME Server and guided analytics. Okie dokie. So let's start with specific integrations that we added. And the first one is something that allows you to connect to more resources that you find on Google. So that was a common customer request. Some customers have all their data in Google and wanted to be able to read out their data from Google Sheets, for instance, and then you can connect to Google and read out your data. This is best done in a little demo, so let me quickly go here. Is it going? Yes. So if you go into your KNIME, this should look familiar. This is KNIME, by the way. So if I enter Google in here, you see all these different nodes that we added, especially about reading from Google Sheets. And here's a little workflow. The biggest challenge is always how to authenticate with Google. So you have to connect and do some, make sure you are who you are. And there are 2 different options. Either if you do this based on an API connection, you can use something like this and have to go into Google, set up access tokens and create service accounts, etc. So quite complicated, but very useful if you run this automated or on a server. The other option, which is slightly more interactive, is if you use this Google Sheets Interactive Service Provider. What this does, it uses OAuth 2. If you connect here, it will give you this usual Google authentication page where you have to accept that the KNIME Analytics platform is accessing some of the pieces that you have in there. So I can close this. Oops. This is all happy. And then I have, for instance, my Google Sheets reader node where I'm pointing it to some sheet that I want to read. I can also open this one so that you have an idea. So this is the registration data. It's all of you listed in here, but hopefully small enough that you can't read your names. So I'm going to read this data set here. There's also my sheet data. can just execute it and then have my data in KNIME and can then do further analysis and can fine-tune this workflow. Let me quickly do this. So close your eyes for a second. So here I've added a couple more nodes that also allow you to do more things. This one is a typical KNIME loop that Michael also mentioned. So in this case, I'm doing the reading and then doing some grouping of my data set and then writing new sheets to Google. So let me just, so this is Sheets Reader. It looks very similar. It lets me choose what fields to write, etc., etc. A lot of configuration. If I run this, it will iteratively write hello KNIME. Okay. And as you see, there are more tabs being added here, which is now my group data by the courses that you attended in the last 2 days, for instance. So that's our Google Sheets integration. Other integrations that we added are integrations with services at Amazon, specifically Redshift, which is a fully managed data warehouse, quite scalable. We have customers who have all their data in Redshift. The boring piece is that it seamlessly integrates with the KNIME database node, so it's just yet another connector that allows you to read from Redshift. Similarly, Amazon Athena, which is let's say, a database server without a server, but it's backed by the Amazon S3 data storage. It also has a SQL interface, so it just integrates very nicely with KNIME, and you can just read your data from Athena. There's also some workflows that on the public example server where you can see how you can also upload data to Athena. So you have nodes like Amazon S3 connector and then reading some files, and then you can manipulate your data in Athena. And then in the end, what comes out is always a database connection, and then you can do the usual database processing that you have in KNIME. Another integration that we added was the integration with Microsoft SQL Server. As I learned from the people at Microsoft, so they have Microsoft SQL Server and they have Azure SQL Server, and they have different names, but they are the same. Okay, so we just called it SQL Server. Again, this just integrates with the existing KNIME database nodes, and you can do your manipulation, or let's say you use KNIME to build up your query, but when you run this workflow, all the actual computation happens in the database. The SQL Server connector we are also using in a new node that we also added. It's called Run R Model in Microsoft SQL Server. So SQL Server, when they bought the Revolution R, they had the integration of, or they added the ability to run native R code in SQL Server, which is then obviously also very scalable. What we added is a node that is called Run R Model in SQL Server. The idea is, if I just highlight this workflow, that you can learn your model locally in KNIME using, for instance, an R learner node, or let's say a sequence of R nodes, and then you deploy this model into SQL Server. So this particular node here has an R model input, and also a database connection. And what it gives you in return is also a database connection. So when you execute this node, you won't see any CPU load on your local machine, but it all happens in the database. And then obviously this also scales as good as it scales in SQL Server. Few other integrations that we added and that are at least worth mentioning is an integration, or let's say a new data type that represents audio cells. And then there are a bunch of nodes that allow you to read those, let's say, WAV files and then extract features from them. You have certain nodes that allow you to do speech recognition, so they transcribe your WAV file into text. And there we have integration with Microsoft Bing and IBM Watson and others. Michael mentioned the date and time nodes that we revised, and this is, I'm very sorry to say that for Simon, this was really a lot of work, but in the end it's just a bunch of nodes, and it just works. There are different types for time zone support and local dates and duration. You can run this on multiple columns. You have nodes that allow you to do some math on durations, for instance, flow variable support. So very seamlessly. So a few other changes that we made is that we promoted some of the extensions that we used to have in KNIME Labs. So KNIME Labs is that extension that is kind of ongoing work, extensions that we are working on. We moved them out of Labs. They are now part of standard KNIME, including the REST client nodes, feature elimination, and so on. Also, all the most of the JavaScript views, we are going to see those also in action later, and also the text processing extensions. We'll also mention that later when we talk about evangelism. Few more points is the logistic regression node has undergone a rewrite, and it's much more scalable, both in terms of having more rows, but also very wide data. This is not that our previous implementation was inefficient, but there are now different solvers in place that also allow you to deal with data that is overspecified. And then now we come to Dean's personal node, but I was told other people are allowed to use that also. It's called the math formula multi-column, and I'd like to quickly show that instead of just talking about it. Is it? So the idea of that node is so this is just reading some data that has that will also have some numeric columns in it. And one very prominent example of that math formula node is, oh no, this is no, very tiny, it's very similar to the existing math formula node. So it allows you to script something, very simple, a math expression, but instead of just applying it to a single column, you can apply it to multiple columns. This is this feature here, yes. So this is what you see, what you know from the math formula node. Up here, you can specify all the columns you want to apply this particular script to, and this column, let's say age and education, etc. There's one after the other. They are passed into this particular script. One very prominent example is using data normalization, so you can do some normalization of multiple of columns, and then, for instance, feed that into the nodes that do further processing, like, for instance, logistic regression, which I'm not going to mention here in detail. Okay, the last integration that I'd like to mention is the Python integration. We've spent quite some effort to change the backend, how we integrate with Python. One added benefit is that we now have native support for Python 3, and it has also gained some tremendous speed up because we are using a different technology how to communicate with Python. And one of the examples where we use that Python integration is the deep learning integration, and here I'd like to hand over to Christian to talk more about deep learning.
Okay, so I'm here to talk about deep learning in KNIME and how we actually do deep learning in KNIME. But before I do that, I would rather like to first introduce what deep learning actually is. So deep learning is not really a new concept. It's based on an old technology called multi-layer neural networks, which have shown great performance on tasks such as images, videos, text, or sound. Right? These are types of data types which you can't really easily represent in a tabular format, so you have to somehow extract features from them to actually solve your classification or regression task. And this is what deep learning is really good at, right? It can learn some kind of representation useful to solve your problem. What kind of machine learning tasks can you solve with deep learning? Actually, a bunch of regression, classification, unsupervised learning, and of course, reinforcement learning. This is what you see if a computer plays Go against a grandmaster in Go or chess or something like this. There are also real application areas for deep learning, where it's useful for real-world examples. So in computer vision, you've heard about self-driving cars, which, for example, can detect objects and images, cars, buildings. There's the road, which is quite useful. And another example is face detection, where you basically can not only find faces in images, you can also estimate the age of the person. You can even map the name of a person on the person if you want to. I'm not saying that it's good, but you could. And then you have examples for speech recognition. If you talk to Alexa, Siri, there should be, or most likely is a deep network behind that. You have examples for natural language processing, so language translation. You have examples in cheminformatics for early drug discovery, the Internet of Things, time series analysis. There are plenty of use cases where you can actually make use of deep learning techniques. So just a quick recap what we did with KNIME Deep Learning for J. That's an integration we have since version 3.3. And we also showed this integration plenty of times at summits. But as a recap again, so what we do here, we allow our users to build simple network architectures using those nodes on the, let me try that. Using those nodes here to define your deep learning model. Then you can take this model in combination with data and feed it into a feed-forward learner to actually train the model, to adjust the weights of the architecture you defined here. In the end, you can take the trained model then and put it into a predictor and to apply it on some test data. This is the common learner predictor motif you see very often in KNIME. This is quite nice. However, we figured that there are more things our users want to do, right? That there are frameworks for deep learning from Google, TensorFlow, from Microsoft, CNTK, from PyTorch, so Facebook, PyTorch, MXNet, Amazon, and so on and so forth. And all these frameworks have their own strengths and weaknesses. They bring their own networks, their own use cases, their own application types. And we somehow want to make those frameworks accessible within KNIME. Of course, those frameworks not only have their own capabilities, but you can also often download pre-trained networks which some users or even the companies themselves have trained over weeks or months. And you can download those networks and apply them on your data, and even adjust them a little bit to solve your specific use case. I will show how this works later. And then with those frameworks, or some of those frameworks, we will also have more support for more advanced techniques like recurrent neural networks, for GANs. I can't say what the word in English, it's hard to pronounce, but GAN. Then we have multi-layer input and output networks and so on. And in the end, what we also want to do, or what we want to add, is that we allow people who are like experts in deep learning to somehow intervene with what we have in KNIME to add their own functionality, to have their own custom networks, and to like adjust whatever they want. And this led to development, all of this somehow led to the development of KNIME Deep Learning, which we just released with KNIME 3.5. So this framework is a really general framework which allows you to execute, train, fine-tune, build, deploy deep neural networks. And we try to be as independent as possible from the actual deep learning backend, right? So we make use of all those backends, and we try to add KNIME nodes on them such that you can actually execute and make use of those frameworks. And the first implementation, however, of this deep learning framework is based on Keras. It's a really nice framework written in Python, and Keras itself uses TensorFlow or CNTK as their own backends. Okay, I will give a very short live demo, or not too short, but a live demo, where I will train a network here to solve the following task. We have some numbers, images of numbers. It's a famous MNIST data set. And I want to train a network that it can tell me what number is on the small image, right? If I put, for example, this number in the network, I want to know it's a 6. Okay. And I will do this in a short live demo. This one it is. Okay. So this is the workflow I will use to demonstrate how it works. First of all, here I have the data. Again, these are the numbers, right? This is my training data. I have the label of this data, and I want to train a network to classify those numbers. The first thing I have to do is to actually create the network architecture, right? In deep learning case, for JCase, you could visually build it. I will show that in the What's Cooking session. But here now I use this DL Python network creator, and basically what I did, you can easily just copy and paste a script which is available out there into this node and define your network architecture. And this script is just copy-pasted really from the Keras example repository, and I didn't have to change much. So this is how I define my network. I can actually execute that. OK, network has been defined. And now I can use this DL Keras network learner to actually perform the training of the network. Right? It's, again, this typical learner, predictor, or executor, in this case, motive you see often in KNIME. So if I start this process, this may take a while, because you usually train those networks with a lot of data, and those operations are not too cheap, so this will take a while. However, what you can do, you can take a look in this view here and watch the training process. You can see how well the training goes. You can monitor the loss or the accuracy of the network. It depends on what you want to do. There are plenty of options. I don't go into detail, but let's say at some point we are satisfied and we don't want to wait forever until this training has finished. We can click on Stop Learning, which is useful in many, many cases. And then basically the training stops and the model is output to this node. OK, this model now I can use in this DL network executor to simply execute or predict the label of my test data, which is, again, some images. And even on this laptop, it doesn't take too long. I do a bit of post-processing of the actual results of the learning in this format results thing here, and then in the end, I can access the score. OK, and here in this case, it's 77% accuracy, which is not really good for this data set, but I only trained it for 45 seconds, right? So if I would have waited for, let's say, half an hour, I already would have state-of-the-art performance for this type of network. OK. But as I've mentioned before, some frameworks, or many of the frameworks, actually offer pre-trained networks which were trained to solve a certain task. Okay, and there's here in this case, what I did is I went to the model zoo of Keras and I simply downloaded the Inception network. And Inception is a network, deep neural network, which was trained by Google, I guess. And what they did is they trained the network to be able to classify images into 1,000 classes. So really 1,000 classes. And I thought, let's try that with KNIME. And we basically loaded some images. We have a strawberry here. We have a dog, umbrella, a football, and a cup. And we downloaded the network. We here loaded it into KNIME. And the only thing we have to do is we have to start the DL network executor, wait for a bit. It's doing the actual prediction now. Post-processing the results, that I can nicely display them. And then I get the result of this classification, and it works as expected. And we really didn't have to search long for a super nice example. So here it detects a strawberry, dalmatine, hedgehog. Well, it's soccer ball, football, and a cup. And it works out quite well. However, as I said before, this network was trained to solve a given task, right? This network was trained to classify images into 1,000 classes. If I put some other data in there, let's say I put us, like me, Kilian, Greg, Metzi, and Thomas in there, what will happen is that the network tries to somehow put us into whatever they learned. And I'm, well, a crutch. But here, actually, the network performs well, right? It detects Kilian's sunglasses. In the case of Greg, I don't know, but in the case of Thomas, it detects the suit, right? Which is actually quite cool. Well, OK. So how to make use of these networks, which you can actually download from the internet and adapt them to your own needs, right? You can take whatever they did there, the information, there's lots of valuable information in there. So how to adapt your network that you actually can fine-tune the network. And this is something we also want to offer in KNIME, and I will show this on the next slide. Here. So this is what we call transfer learning. And this is very, very cool. So what you can do is you can take a network which was trained on those 1,000 classes. Let's say it's Inception again, or VGG, another network type. And this network was trained to solve the task to classify images into elephants, soccer, umbrella, and whatever. However, what about if I want to have a really specialized network to only be able to classify cats and dogs? Okay, this is just an example. But then I can take the very same network, like the entire structure, the entire trained model, and just adapt the last layer a bit, and maybe the last 2 layers, and put some of my own data over it for training, then I don't need millions of images or like terabytes of data to train a network on weeks and years. If the task is somehow related, it only takes me a couple of hours to fine-tune the network, to specialize on my task, in this case, on cats and dogs. And you can do that, of course, with our deep network integration, deep learning integration, our new one. So what you see here is, again, I load some network. In this case, I load a different architecture called VGG16. Then I use the DL Python network editor to cut away the last layer and add my own layers. It's a small script. Then I use this table reader to read in data, and here I only use 2,000 images. I will like make small manipulation to those images, enhance them a little bit, make them bigger, smaller, like work on, like rotate them a bit, mirror them to enhance. But these are 2,000 base images in the end. And then I use this DL Python network learner. It's another learner for deep neural networks. You could also use the other one, but here I want to show that we also have this one. I use this one to train the network, and in the end, it was easily possible to specialize my network on cats and dogs, and I get an accuracy of 93%, which is state of the art. And I didn't have to write a lot of script, just this editing thing was a scripting thing. Okay, so to summarize why deep learning with KNIME, we want to make state-of-the-art functionality, state-of-the-art deep learning functionality available without having to reinvent the wheel, right? We are not like the research platform for deep learning, we are the deployment platform, we are the execution platform. We bring deep learning to you. And we want to enable our users to do the data, pre- and post-processing within KNIME, add easy options to fine-tune and train those network architectures, and then in the end also deploy those networks within your IT architecture, and in the end, yeah, make deep learning more approachable. Okay, with that, Tobias is the next to talk about the big data extensions.
Okay. Thanks, Christian. Okay, before I start what we have developed over the last year, I want to give you a very short introduction about the big data extensions. They consist of basically 2 different extensions. The first one is the KNIME Big Data connectors that allow you to easily reach out to Hive, Impala, and HDFS and push down all of the ETL operations into your Hadoop cluster. They're based on the database and the remote file handling extension. And the database extension allow you to visually assemble SQL code, so you don't need to write any database queries yourself, but simply use the KNIME nodes to visually assemble them. And then the queries are sent down into the database and use the power of the database for the processing. The second extension is the KNIME extension for Apache Spark, and this one is built on top of the Spark MLlib, which is the scalable machine learning library that runs on Hadoop, and that comes with a lot of predefined algorithms for classification, regression, clustering, and so on. And the nice thing is the usage model of the of the Spark extension is very similar to the existing KNIME nodes. So when you know how to train a K-means model in KNIME, you can do this now on Spark. And all of the job management and so on is handled by KNIME and the Spark nodes. And the data stays in your cluster, which is very important. So there is no data movement, and all the operations are performed in Hadoop, scalable and distributed. Okay, so what have we added over the last year to these extensions? I think the most important change is that, as Bernd already mentioned that now the big data extensions are free and open source also since December, so you can simply download it and connect to your own Hadoop cluster to try it out and work with these nodes now. Then we have also extended the cloud integration, so now you can also read and write from cloud storage systems like Azure S3 or Amazon S3 or Azure Blob Store with the big data connectors and also with the Spark extension. Then we have also added a couple of new nodes, among them the most important, I think, the missing value handling and the group by node. And we also improved the usability, and one of the main things there is that now the Spark context is automatically managed by KNIME, and you don't need to take care of that. Okay, and then which we have spent the most time last year was the integration of Spark 2.0. And you might wonder, okay, so why would somebody like me wants to upgrade to Spark 2.0 instead of using the existing Spark versions? And there are basically three main reasons why you want to use Spark 2.0 instead of 1.6. And the first reason is that with Spark 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2, the Spark community has added a lot of new features and functionalities and also fixed a lot of existing bugs in the code. So the second reason is that it's very easy for you to try it out because the big data vendors allow you to install the old Spark version and the new Spark version in parallel. So you can run in your cluster Spark 1.6 and Spark 2.0 or 2.2 in parallel. And so your production system can still run with 1.6, and with your new workflows, you can try out and using Spark 2.0 there, for example. And I think the main reason why most of the people want to upgrade is Spark 2.0 is, or starting with Spark 2.0, Spark is way more faster than Spark 1.6 because of the integration of a new data representation structure that's called data frames. Okay, and why did we spend that much time? Well, from Spark 1.6 to 2.0, that was a major version change, and that incorporates a lot of API changes, and we needed to update the ecosystem libraries and migrate from data frame or from the old data representation to data frames so that you get the new, better performance there. Okay, and now, so that was what we need to do today in the background, and now let's have a look what you as the end users would need to do to migrate your existing KNIME workflows that were running against the Spark 1.6 cluster in order to have them run on a Spark 2.2, 2.1, 2.0 cluster. Okay, so the first step is you go to the create Spark context nodes that defines where your cluster is running and which Spark version is running there. And then the first step is you change the Spark version there. And the second step is you execute the workflow, and then you are done, right? I mean, so with KNIME, it's very easy to change to a new Spark version. Instead of writing or rewriting all your jobs, you just change the version. And another benefit is also that within the same Spark workflow, you can also connect to different Spark versions. So you just have different create Spark contact nodes. They point to different Spark clusters with different Spark versions, and then you are done. Okay, and with that, I want to hand over to Rosaria to tell you about the education in evangelism. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll be short. I'm going to explain you where you can find more and learn more about KNIME. So I'm going to start with the courses. The available courses at the moment are 5. You have a basic course, an advanced course. Usually they are taught together in a 2-day course, a text mining course, a big data course, and a KNIME Server course. That's what we have now. This is where the next courses are going to be held. So we are going to have in Germany a few courses, 1 course in Italy, 1 course in 2 courses in US, in Austin, and then some in Switzerland. Now, what do I do if I am located in Costa Rica, or even Glasgow, or São Paulo? I mean, I cannot fly to Europe to have the courses. So this is why we introduced a few online options this year. Here, you can see Catherine. She's the one who's running the online course for, we have run the first try in February, and it was quite successful. It's the basic course. It's the same course that you would get if you come to an on-site course, only just slightly reformatted to run online. It consists of 4 times 1-hour lessons distributed over 4 weeks. It's interactive, so it's with teacher, it's not with video, it's with a real teacher, Catherine, exactly. And there are exercises at the end of each lesson. You do the exercises in your week of time, so whenever you have time, and then at the beginning of the next lesson, the teacher is going to work with to present the solutions to the exercise and work with you on the problems that you have had with the exercises. Right, so for now we have only the basics. We are working on the advanced KNIME as well. And this is the link. Where is it? This is the link if you want to know more about that. Another option is the e-learning course. The e-learning course is still online. It's without a teacher, so there are videos and still exercises, but then you have to check the solutions yourself. You don't have an interaction with any teacher. It's still working. There are 15 lessons at the moment. It covers everything from data access to flow control. So you have the whole spectrum of the KNIME functionalities, at least the main ones. I mean, and it still works. It depends on, you know, if you have less time, if your time is a bit more spotty. What about books? So far, the two main books on the KNIME Press, we have had the KNIME Beginner Slack to start, to get a bit an idea of how KNIME works. We have had the KNIME Cookbook to get a bit more of an advanced look into the advanced features of KNIME. The KNIME Cookbook is going to be reviewed in March, thanks to Gianni, to the help of Gianni. We have two new books. We put together the collection of the blog post of the Will They Blend series. Last year we had a Will They Blend blog post series where we were blending data from different data sources. So they're all now collected in there. So if you have anybody who asks you, can I blend the data source X with database Y, probably the answer is in the Will They Blend book. And now, so last week, we published the From Words to Wisdom. The title is Thank You to Frank. And it's about text processing, all what KNIME has to offer in text processing and how to put together a workflow to get, for example, topic detection or sentiment analysis. And since I am nice, I have a gift for you. You can get this book now for free using this promotion code here. So you... Sorry? Yeah, that was not very long. So you can connect to the KNIME Press, select the new book From Words to Wisdom, and then use this promotion code. You can't say I'm not nice to you. OK. And then finally, we have a bunch of meetups all around the world. Lately, we have introduced a new kind of meetup event. It's the Learnathon. The Learnathon is in between. We called it like that. I don't know if it's an appropriate name, but we called it like that. It's in between a hackathon and a workshop. It's a workshop because we go there and we learn. So we have a set of exercises, we have a little presentation, and we learn about the data science, the different phases in a data science cycle. It's like a hackathon because we come there with our own laptop, and then we work together. We separate in groups, and we work together to solve some guided exercises. So if you hear about a Learnathon close to you or a meetup close to you, and you want to participate, you can be either the expert in the group who teaches the newbies, or you can be the one who learns more from the more expert. Here you can see that's the picture from the Learnathon in Zurich. You can see Catherine that is giving a demo about KNIME. And here you can see Vincenzo, who I think is paying attention to what Catherine says, I guess. Those are the KNIME user meetup groups around the world. And the ones in red are the ones with an upcoming event in the next few months. As you can see, a lot of the upcoming events are actually in the US. And that's correct, because we are going to run a US Roadshow in March and April. We are going to start from the East Coast, so Boston, New York, Cincinnati, and then we are going to move to the West Coast and then to close with Denver and Houston. So if you're based in the US or you know somebody who would like to attend a Learnathon in the US, ask Jim, Catherine, Vincenzo, Gianni, Jeff and Scott, who are going to run this van of the US Roadshow. Okay, and then finally, some more material on the web. We are going to have available some innovation notes. So here is an innovation note provided by EPAM. Those are kind of descriptions of use cases from the point of view of the data that I have as input and the kind of results that I can obtain. There is, of course, an example that you can download and you can customize, but let's say the description is more from the use case point of view. We have a new KNIME Forum. It has been changed. There are many more functionalities. It's much easier to use. Christian is the one who was responsible behind this change. So if you want to try it out and if you have some discussion, you can ask Christian directly. And then finally, we are present on social media. This is the word cloud from the tweets of the past week. So if you have tweeted, your words are probably in there. If you have not tweeted, you can tweet it. You can tweet today and tomorrow and Friday, and you can use the hashtag KNIME Summit 2018. Okay, that's all for education.
Thank you, Rosaria. So I'm here to talk about the KNIME Server. And to do that, I just wanted to recap what Bernd was showing with the KNIME software ecosystem. So these pieces up the top with the open source parts and the extensions from the community and the partners. And down here, all of the things around the KNIME Server. So collaboration to help you have better compliance, better best practices, and to share expertise. Automation, so that's scheduling and model management, and we'll see more, especially about the model management on the Model Factory talk later. And also about deployment to either to applications and also to humans. So that's the kind of the high-level overviews of what we want there. But the kind of the functionalities that the server brings then is things like the shared repository, so data, metanodes, nodes being shared, and of course workflows, so sharing those with your colleagues. Of course, once you start to do that sharing, you want to make sure that those resources are managed in a reliable and compliant way, so that's why you have access management and integration with things like LDAP and Active Directory. You want to be able to execute those workflows in a flexible way. So that might be taking the resources from the KNIME server and executing remotely, so having extra power to execute your workflows. Or you want to schedule your workflow so that it runs on a regular basis and you can kind of fire and forget and just have those results written out to databases or sent to wherever you need them to be sent. And then you have the web enablement, so that's the web portal down at the bottom, and we'll see a lot about that with the guided analytics workflows that you can build. And of course, you may want to integrate that with existing applications, and one of the easiest ways to do that is via the REST API. So first of all, just a couple of smaller changes that I think will make plenty of people here who are using the KNIME server a little bit more happy. And there you have things like easier log file downloads. So if you want to get hold of those log files and see what's going on, there's now a button in the admin portal. There's now a button that allows you to upload new license files via the admin portal. So when you come around to your annual license renewal, you can just quickly upload that, and there's no server downtime needed. We have also log file analysis workflows. So if you want to see how often certain workflows are run, that's possible. And also we have a workflow that allows you to list the scheduled jobs in the web portal. So there are a couple of small changes, but I think for some people they'll make a big difference. So let's move on to one of my favorite new features, which is the deploy to server button. If you have a local workflow or a workflow group that you want to upload to the server, you can just right-click on that in the analytics platform in the KNIME Explorer, as seen on the left-hand side. And then you can choose Deploy to Server. You choose where you want to upload it on your KNIME server, and then it's available on your KNIME server, and you can go on to do your execute or so on. Greg will show that in action in a bit, I think. So then there's also the Open in Web Portal button. In this case, it just gives you easy access for your workflow once it's on the server. You can click Open in Web Portal, and then you can find the web portal page without needing to remember the URL. And I think one of the really cool features that came out from just a small discussion that we had in the office one day, and we put this together just before the Fall Summit in Austin, and it's now in the release in 4.6.1. So if you have a standard workflow, just like on the left, where we're taking actually here a database connection, we're doing reading some data, there's a pre-trained model here, and we're predicting the results and writing that back to the database. So that's a fairly typical thing that you might want to use a scheduler to then schedule that to run on a daily basis or a weekly basis to update your database. what if you want to then deploy that to an application in a convenient way? Well, actually, there you can go forward, and you have the REST-enabled workflow. And you'll see the middle is exactly the same part of the workflow. And I just have a couple of different helper nodes here. So I have the JSON input node here. I can convert that to a KNIME table. And I have another node here that will convert my column to JSON, and then I output that. Let's take a little bit more look. Here, I can specify the API, basically, from my REST API. So I'm just saying here, there's a row of data, and there's something like this adult data set, so age, working class, education level of the person we're interested to make a prediction for. And finally, once we've made the prediction of their expected salary, we use a JSON output to output the data to our application. And that was already possible with existing versions of the KNIME server. But one of the things that happens sometimes is then you have to kind of go to your IT department and explain what KNIME is and how to integrate that into your into the IT stack. And those conversations can be a bit tricky. And that's why we've brought in this Swagger UI as a way to browse this. So there's another button here on the server for the workflow that says Show API Definition, and that will display the results as a Swagger UI page. And people who are dealing with these kind of integrations, they'll know how to handle that. So let's just take a quick look at how that looks. So I have my KNIME server and my REST API-enabled workflow, exactly the same one as I showed on the screenshot. I'm going to choose Show API Definition, and this is launching then this Swagger UI page. I can control a bunch of different functionalities that are exposed through the REST API, but in this case, I'm interested to execute my workflow. I have the option to execute via HTTP POST or via GET. In this case, I'm going to choose the POST request, and I get to see a couple of basic parameters, and again, my default API values. But let's actually try the execution out. Here, I can go into my, let's say I can change the age of the person I'm interested in, and we'll just leave it, maybe change the capital gain a little bit as well. Then when I choose execute, this is now executing on the KNIME server, and I have my response code back, so it's a 200 successful execution, and I see, again, my results that have been, my input parameters have been changed, and then I see my output values here, again, the prediction. So this has all been executed basically programmatically, and the results coming back on the server. And the nice thing about this is you can hand this off to someone who knows about doing integrations with REST APIs, and they'll be very, very familiar with this interface and way of working. So, OK, so the next thing we want to talk about is the social workflow repository. And for that, in a minute, Alex will come on stage and run the demo. And the key point here is this is preview functionality. What does that mean? Well, it means you can use it now. It's available in KNIME Server 4.6.1. There's a preview guide that explains how to access that functionality, and we can show you the demo on the demo stations. And if you know about KNIME Labs, it's kind of the same idea. So it's useful functionality. We're planning to add more functionality to that. We very much welcome feedback from users. And in particular, one of the things that is worth mentioning is that the functionality in the UI is likely to change. So we may make changes there. We may even change the name of the tool. And yeah, feedback very much welcome. So the motivation behind the social workflow repository, if you're someone who is building workflows, typically you've got to get something done, and ideally you want to get that done quickly. So wouldn't it be great if someone else had already done this? So of course, first of all, you can check the examples server and the node guide and see what we've built there in the KNIME community already. But what if that's something that's relevant just for my team, my lab, my group, my company, that's connection to a certain database type or a particular data type that you're using? We can't build those examples, so you might want to be able to learn from your colleagues. If you're managing a team and you're responsible for reproducible and reusable data science, it would be really, really great if your team didn't need to reinvent the wheel each time you start a new project. And you have other questions, like what happens if one of my team members leaves? And how can I kind of foster that sharing culture within my organization so that we can be more effective? So that's where the social workflow repository comes in. And I'd like to bring Alex up onto stage to demo that. And the idea here with the social workflow repository is all about answering those kind of questions. So please welcome Alex.
Thank you, John. Okay, thank you, John. So we will, oh no, that was not the browser. 1 second, sorry. That's it. So this is basically the entry point for our social workflow repository. It's customizable with an introductory text and a news section that you can basically customize to your needs. And it shows you what's going on your KNIME server. So it shows you exactly the same workflows as you would see in the WebPortal or in the KNIME Explorer. And of course also checks your permissions so you only see what you're allowed to see. And they're the most recent workflows, top-rated workflows. And if you're feeling lucky, you can look at the random workflows and see what your colleagues are up to. In the social workflow repository, you can also tag your workflows. So on the bottom, you see the most often used tags. And recently, I've uploaded a workflow. I want to search for it. This was train model. Sorry. Logs out if nothing happens for a while. And what I get is a result of all matching workflows here. I could also click on my username to see only the workflows that I've uploaded recently. I can also click on tags to see only workflows that are tagged. And right now I want to look at this very sophisticated workflow that trains a model that it reads from a file. There's a short description here that supports Markdown. It pulls it from the meta information that you can give to the workflow in the KNIME Analytics platform. You see some meta information like when it was created and last updated, and you can rate this workflow and edit the tags. What you also see is that it pulls the requirements in terms of KNIME features for this workflow, so you can get an overview of what you actually need to install to use that workflow once you download it here. It also shows you the snapshots because, sorry, yeah. I uploaded the first version, and then Emil really wanted to have this random forest trained with 250 instead of 100 trees. So I uploaded the second version for him where this was done. I notified him of this, and then John wanted this to be deployed on the database. So we wanted to have another workflow, which Emil then linked here. And this is the workflow John just showed before, which is the model deployed to the database. And as we can see here, the requirements changed. Now it needs the KNIME connectors for common databases. And again, John wants something special. Now he wants it to be REST enabled as well. So let's look at this. We go back, and there's this predict results using REST API. And we have two versions this time. The first version is the one we had before with the database enabled model, sorry, and with those requirements. And then there's a second version that was uploaded by Emil, which shows the REST enabled workflow. And both can be downloaded from this website using the download button. You can either download the current version on the server or version 1 and 2 as explained in the version history with the commit messages. Okay, and that's it. Next up is Greg with Guided Analytics. Thank you.
I may not be able to do my presentation. I'm so shocked to see Emil commenting on things in the social workflow repository. All right, I'm going to be talking about guided analytics. For those of you who haven't seen this before, there's a lot of new people. I want to give a brief introduction to what guided analytics is before I actually get into the details about what's new. Michael mentioned this a little bit already. This is the way I think about it. So I have a number of pictures that I'll show you just to walk through how we think about this. We're starting with someone who needs data or who needs analytics on that data. This may be a business analyst or a decision maker or someone in the company who doesn't really know how to do data analysis on their own. Then over on the side, you have the KNIME expert who's sitting at their computer. They know how to do KNIME. They know how to do data analysis. They know how to do data mining. And what typically happens is the person who needs something goes and talks to the other one. They typically go to their office, sit down, they talk about this for a while, come up with a solution. The KNIME expert gives them a report or an output, a file that they like. They go back to their desk and everything's fine. Well, what often normally happens is, those of you may know, they go back to their desk and they look at it and realize, oh, wait, I don't have everything I need, there's something else. And so then they go back, sorry. Back on again, thank you. Did I hold the pose well? They go back and they ask the KNIME expert to, can you update that report? I need another column, I need another graphic. There's new data, I'd like this repeated again. They do the work, they go back, everything's fine, and then they realize, oh no, wait. Maybe this time the KNIME expert comes to them, they bring their desk with them and their computer, and you know how this goes, right? We go back and forth. And the idea of guided analytics is to try and figure out a way to make it easier for those two to collaborate with each other without having to bounce back and forth a lot, because they both have other stuff they need to do. So really the idea is guided analytics, we're going to provide some workflows that we can, the KNIME expert can capture their best practices, their knowledge, they can provide some analytics, they can provide some model building, and provide that to the business analyst or the person who actually needs the data in a way that they can work with it, they can customize it, they can learn from it, but they aren't likely to shoot themselves in the foot, right? So it's guiding the analytics for that person. The name is not a mystery. What that typically means is, for us, a lot of interactive JavaScript. We typically deploy these via the KNIME WebPortal that John was talking about. This is part of the server. And so when we do what's new for guided analytics, we're really talking about what's new in the interactive JavaScript views. One thing that's really important for this audience, not all of you have the server, right? We think you all should have the server, of course, but not everybody has a server. If you don't, everything that I'm going to show you, I'm actually going to show you almost all of this in the analytics platform itself. You can do all of this in the analytics platform on your own. You need the server if you want to have somebody else do the work without having to launch KNIME themselves. So let's go on, and I'll just go straight into the demo of what's new, assuming I can make the mouse work. All right. So I'm just going to go through a number of new views. The first one is the sunburst chart. This is a great interactive view for working with particular types of data. I'm not going to go into the data processing on any of these because we're a bit behind time. I always get stuck at the end of these sessions and I'm responsible for making sure that we don't run too far over. So you won't see the data pre-processing in this. Let's go in and look at the interactive view. I click on the chart, do run and show me the views. And this is now a sunburst chart. This is clickstream data from a web server log. We start at in the middle, we have the beginning of the clickstream. So this set of users, 28.7% of them started on the home page. They then moved to the account page. From there, they stayed on the account page or moved to other. You can see as I'm just moving out, I'm walking through what the clickstream was, what the user was doing, and you see the percentages of the data go down as I do that, right? So 1.34% of the users went from, sorry, let me click and stabilize this. 1.34% of the users started at home, went to account, and then went to the product page. So it's a nice way just to kind of analyze log data. if there's time at the end, which I doubt there will be, I have some other things that you can do with this plot that's also quite interesting. It's a really cool visualization for working with data of particular types. The next one is a stream graph. This one is probably the most attractive of the plots that KNIME has available. Unfortunately, it's also one of the more limited in terms of the types of data it can work with. This is really good for time series data with a limited number of categories. I'll just start with the end of the story. So this is a stream graph. I really like these things. This is data pulled from Twitter. And these are particular either hashtags or @ mentions that were done. All of these involve KNIME in one form or another. And down at the bottom, or this is a time axis that we have. Let me get back out of full screen mode so you can actually see that. Down at the bottom, we have the weeks labeled. So this is a spike in the mentions of KNIME before our last summit, so before the summit last year. This is the spike in mentions of KNIME before the last release. When we did the December 2016 release. This is the release in the summertime. This is our spring summit last year, or 2016. It's a nice way to kind of get at the data, track how things are going. I can go from different series, so I can see time series, machine learning mention, turn machine learning off. Sorry, let me go just to machine learning. The dimensions of machine learning. This is stuff that where John was mentioned. I, of course, include myself in this graph, so here's where I was mentioned in Twitter. There are other things you can see, like because it's a time series down on the axis, you can see that in the months around Christmas time and New Year's, people are busy using KNIME, not tweeting about it. So this is the time that I like best, right? All right, time series, that was stream graph. The tag cloud, what I'm going to show you now is this is something we haven't seen before. I showed you, in each of the other ones, I showed you one view. Right here, I have a number of the views wrapped up in a wrapped metanode. These are one of these gray boxes that Michael mentioned. This is an interaction point. After I show you the view, I'm going to show you what this looks like on the web portal. This is a one-page web portal app. But one of the things that was added last year in KNIME is that you can now see that view in KNIME itself. So if I take this wrap metanode and execute that and open the view, I'm going to get a view that has a tag cloud, which is one of the new features. So this is interactive. I can go through and tack on the clouds, click on the tags themselves. I have a slider up at the top that filters by document frequency, so I can change the contents of that tag cloud. And then down at the bottom, I have a table. And the table is configured to show me only the documents that include this particular tag. So as I'm clicking around, I can see which of the documents a particular tag appears in. If you're interested, if this is interesting and you like the way this interactivity works, we're doing a workshop on Friday that'll show you how to build actually exactly this visualization. That's part of the workshop, is to show how to do this stuff. Once I'm happy with the workflow and happy with the view, I can deploy it to the server, as John showed. So I'm going to go through, click deploy to server. Pick the server I want to deploy to, tell it where I'm going to put it. So 2018 Summit, let me run it there. Of course, I already have one. I will overwrite that. Now, then it shows me in the KNIME Explorer, that particular workflow. I want to see what that actually looks like in the web portal, right? Because I just showed you in KNIME. I've now put it on the web portal so anybody who has access to the server can see it. So let's go see what that looks like. I'm sorry, wrong button. So I will open that in the web portal. John mentioned the authentication that KNIME has, so the server has. So make sure that I'm allowed to see this. I will now go in and start the workflow. And you can see in my browser the same tag cloud that I showed you before, right? So it's exactly the same view that I was seeing inside of KNIME itself, but now it's on the web, so anybody in my company who has access to the server can use that as well. That's a very simple example of the guided analytics idea. Okay, let me go back and show you a couple of other things before we run out of time. Next one is a network visualization. We spent a lot of time on this last year. I'm going to just go very quickly. This is another combination of multiple views. I will have a slider up at the top again. So there's a slider. This is controlling some properties of the things in the network. So you can see as I slide this around, the contents of the network view change. And then if I select things in the network view, they will highlight in the table. So I can just go through, select some things, and then somewhere in this table, things will be highlighted. Because what I often really want to do is just see the things that are selected. I can also tell the table to only show me the selected rows. And so now as I click around in here, I can see the particular molecules that I was looking at, so the bits I'm interested in. Before people get too freaked out because there are pictures of molecules, I'll make this go away and move on to something else. Sorry, Michael. The next one, this is optics. Optics is a clustering tool it's similar to dbScan for those of you who know it. One of the interesting things about optics is that it allows you to, change the clustering criteria. So there's an interactive view that comes out. These are the points of the data points that I clustered, and I can go through and change what the clustering threshold is to kind of fine-tune what where the clustering is drawn, so where the line between the individual clusters is drawn. It's a useful way to explore data and to come up with an interactive tagging of the data. So basically to have the humans supervise an unsupervised algorithm. The last one is they're going to show a couple of different visualizations or a couple of different new things. The first is one of the more exciting, I think. This is the table editor. This is something that you've not been able to do in KNIME before. So what I've done here, I'm going to show two different use cases for the table editor. What I've done is I've just loaded a bunch of sample data. I put an empty constant value column in it that I'm going to use for annotations. And now what I want to do is take notes on the data. So I'm going to execute this and open the view. You can see this is the data that I generated. It's very exciting. The interesting bit is the annotation column. And here I can go in and actually add new information. So this has a German keyboard, and I'm typing in English. You can see I can self-correct. Anyway, you get the sense. I can actually add values to this. So I put an empty column in, and I can go through and add annotations to the data. When I then close this and save my results, those come in the output table. So now you can see in the output table, the text that I typed in the view is now available. So this is a really easy way if you want to give people the ability to just take notes on the data. You can do that now with the table editor. All you do is add an empty column and let them type in it. You can also use this to do other stuff like change the contents of data in the column. So I just took an empty cell and edited it. This particular example, what I have is a table editor where I can actually go in and change values. So you can see I have a number. This is renaming a bunch of columns in a data set that has really stupid column names. I made a typo, so I'm going to fix that. And save that, and now that is passed on to the rest of the nodes in the workflow. So you can see I actually just changed the contents of the data table, which is something you've not been able to do before, which I find quite cool. Once I'll pass that. So you saw this is using empty columns in the table editor to add annotations and then actually editing the data itself. Next thing I want to show you is the Data Explorer. This provides a summary of the data that's in a table. This has a number of tabs. It's going to show me a summary of all the numeric columns. It's going to show me a summary of all the categorical columns. And then in the end, it's going to show me a preview of the data itself. So these are the various columns that are in my data set. You can see for each of them. So for the weight column, I see minimum, max, mean, and a number of other statistics. I can expand this and see additional information. This has an interesting feature where as I make it wider, those columns that were showing up when I expanded it pop up top here. So you can see if you feel like it's weird, you're missing columns, it's just because your table's too small. Right? You see what it's doing. There's a name for this, but I'm too old to remember what it is. Those are the numeric columns. There's also a nominal tab for the nominal values. So these are the states. You can see the states that were present in my data set and the histogram of the distributions. And finally, there's a preview if you want to see what the data itself looks like. Michael mentioned this already. One of the interesting things you can do with this is use it to actually edit your data. So if I take a look at this and realize, okay, I'm not interested in these three columns, I can click on the exclude column field. Then when I close this and execute it, those are just removed from the table. So downstream from this, none of those columns are present anymore. Good. Bernd showed you the math formula multi-column node, so we've taken that out. And I think with that, I'm done. And we're more or less back on time.
Thanks, Brad.